Thanks to Owlcat Games and a contact there, I got to spend 20 plus hours with the next game from them, Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, or Rogue Trader in the future. It's like Pathfinder, but for people who want to service the Emperor and want to inject some Warhammer 40,000 cathedral ships, space station churches, and burning heretics fun into their lives. I love Warhammer, I always have. It's big, it's bold, it's covered in pseudo-religion, and thinks that captain chairs need to look like it can fit 7 captains and need to be saluted even if they're empty. You take on the leadership mantle of a rogue trader vessel after its previous captain took a dirt nap during a betrayal. The game wastes no time in you taking out a group of warriors, machine men, and psychers out to explore the local systems. You're only one of a few traders, men and women who are warriors who are given free pass to explore the darker parts of the universe and open trade in the name of the Emperor. But it all descends into a story of more betrayal, alien weirdness, and, of course, who can say that they love the Emperor more? In just a couple minutes. FYI, this game's demo section is with an upgraded character a bit into the game. I want to talk just for a moment about the atmosphere in Warhammer 40,000 games. The best thing about Warhammer 40,000 has always been its atmosphere. A bake sale for crazy where it's buy two, get one free, and when you leave, they stuff your bag full of free crap anyway. Almost every single group and faction within the game is unhinged in some way, tinged by the forces of chaos, touched by the fight against them, or massaged gently into despotic-like dread from the friendliness with it. It is awesome. All of this controlled by the Emperor in the universe, the main leader who sits basically on a throne and his brain keeps sending out cell phone calls to everyone in the universe, still telling him what all to do. It's like listening to an answer machine message from a sibling that died, a pissy, violent, warlike sibling who somehow keeps changing the message every week. That atmosphere is seen everywhere. This is a big game with big bad guys, big good guys, and big hitting combat, but the exploration is one of the few things that I think a lot of Warhammer games get wrong. Owlcat seems to have nailed it, and I do want to talk about that exploration, but let's dive into the combat itself. Don't expect things to be completely different from the prior games that they've done. There's particularly important and enjoyable nuances here, but it is the same tried and true strategy kind of gameplay. Your characters have their characteristics like weapon skill, toughness, strength, perception, and so on, and they do exactly what you would expect, with skills adding to or adjusting them in battle, as well as negotiations and discussions. The game's momentum system here has you building up points to heroic actions that you can take, even apart from the normal actions that you have, though. When in battle, you have movement and action points, both being used and being reburned and regained by taking more actions or moving. It's a game that really does push forward on keeping your characters moving and doing something, using those skills that might buff them or give you more momentum on the next turn, with momentum being that swing effect in a lot of these battles. And speaking of battles, there's a lesson here in both strategy as well as understanding the balance between going just the right amount and pushing it with your characters. Take, for instance, your sister of battle, Argenta. There's probably no one on the team more overtly aggressive or offensive than her. When she walks into basements, they turn the lights on. A female space marine carrying a gun half the size of another character, she can take out enemy after enemy with her abilities and even push herself farther and farther, adding fatigue to herself if she chooses, which lowers her strength. Seeing each character able to handle themselves in battle is also something that's wonderful here. Everyone has something that's useful, even just one skill to target an enemy or something else. Also, speaking of using those skills, they layer upon one another incredibly well. For example, you might have one skill that targets an enemy for one character, another to make that enemy scared. Then you walk in with Argenta, push in that one last bit of energy she has, and you watch her blow the helmeted head off a gang leader in one shot. It just doesn't get old seeing these characters moving around. And most of the skills for all these characters either have a group effect or something that can overall help the group as long as you look into it and understand what it's trying to do. And a great deal of the action and reaction is built on skills that help the group. For example, she also has this incredible skill of marking territory and basically saying, hey, if you do good here, I'm going to give you a pat on the back. A successful hit from that marked space gives a huge buff. It's going to take forever to figure out how each of these can best be used and how quickly things can fall apart when enemies start using toxins, freezing, fire, and stun effects that come into the fray. So I walked into battle and I was doing well, but then on the opponent's turn, they lit me on fire and then their leader stomped over to me and 3 hammer smashed my entire group, stunning 2 and knocking 1 out cold. What I liked about this is I had not watched exactly what I was doing and I was in a bad spot and grouped together. You can group together with other characters, but the people I had in this one spot, bad idea. And protection in this game is that typical cut into 2 halves, a full protection or a half protection when hiding behind things, but neither are 100%. Now, speaking of percents, yes, while some games are trying to go away from this, Warhammer Rogue Trader has dived straight into it. There are percentages everywhere, so expect that. Be prepared to swing from enemy to see which guy you can hit the best and for the most damage. It is in that way calculating. I liked it. I have no issue with that, and I think it fits with the Rogue Trader kind of aspect in Warhammer in particular. Battle and successful quests are going to lend you XP, which lets you buy skills for your career and use them on your character. And there are a ton of skills. In the exploration areas, you walk around these busy districts, all Warhammer 40,000 like, with the dregs and the awesome parts mixed in together, collecting items for your storage and for your inventory and talking to people. Speaking of storage, there's a ship inventory here, and when you collect enough items within any one particular category, like let's say ranged weapons or up close, and you're gonna pick a lot of these up, you can sell them to merchants as a package, raising their reputation with you. And that's the name of the game here anyway, because it is commerce. It also removes a little bit of that go around, pick every single thing up, and you sort of have to do that kind of gameplay. You don't necessarily have to do that in this game, and I like it. For example, you don't really use money either. You use a system of credit that your team has built up. It's a lot like options power when buying stocks. While the storage system is bulky, I do have to say that, and weirdly not complex while looking complex at first, I like the idea of working in the merchant business into the gunplay and gameplay all mixing together, because that really is what Rogue Trader is about. And they understood how to mix in the gameplay and the actual fiction into something that we don't see a lot of times, which was the inventory. All this is going to suck if it doesn't look good and perform good. Now, this is an alpha, but talking about the graphics themselves, they're going for that futuristic but in the past kind of look. DOS readouts on some places, mixed with that future tech that you expect from Warhammer 40,000. Machines are large screens with brass and copper fittings and green screens, and characters can be a dude in a pair of pants 2 times too small with an alien chip on his shoulder to your own robotic best friend who's a servitor, chanting to the machine god and wielding multi-attachments with suspectability to heal you, but carrying enough weaponry to sink World War II destroyers. It's got that Pathfinder look. It's a bit more busy and complex than, say, a Baldur's Gate or a Pillar style when you look at the HUD. One thing that the game does absolutely right instantly is the clutter and the business and the overt overpopulation that many locales in a Warhammer game has, and a lot of these kind of titles don't show even in cities. You definitely have it here. The first time you make landing in this one particular section and start walking around, there's almost too many people, and you do have to fight a bit with the camera, but again, an alpha. Momentarily, it can be difficult to parse, but after a little while, you see how nice it is to have this full, busy location that feels like there's a lot of characters there, and there isn't 3 characters and always one NPC that you need to talk about. Outcat has also made sure verticality is reproduced here in spades, starting out with your ship and giving you just a hint of a couple decks. It sort of goes crazy in that first couple sections, though, and they're going to have to work hard on this, very hard, to get the camera, the transparencies, the occluding of locations and architecture, and identifying of enemies and characters and items down pat. It's a bit rough right now. Let's talk about space combat just for a moment. It's got that too. Each of your main officers can use specific moves, and they can only take 1 move per turn with more abilities unlocked as you level up. The game's built on strategy from the bottom up, and the same can be said for the space combat. You don't swivel in place. It's about moving and shooting as you keep turning. And in many ways, it's going to remind you of older Star Trek games or other games where it's based mostly on a 2D plane. Due to how it works, I love this, and I think it's going to progress nicely. I also like that each faction, alien, or enemy type has completely different styled moves. And I didn't really have any issues at all with the space combat. I will say that the on-the-ground tactical combat I liked a little bit better, but it feels to me like there just wasn't as much, just because of how the story was and where I was, to see a lot of space combat. Always watch out, because regardless if a character can get to a spot unmolested by a fire that's been burning for 3 turns, if you don't tell them exactly how to get there, expect them to arrive toasty. Speaking of toasty, right now, this thing is definitely a little bit poor on the performance side and requires a good deal of power to get it running very smoothly at least. This is an alpha, as I said before. It's a ways away from release, and ignoring the bug or two that I had about pathfinding when you were in battles, I said, performance can take a nosedive when you have a bunch of effects on screen. Drop a couple fire grenades, some toxin, and then use your psyker to babble sweet nothings into the ear of an enemy so that they go psychotic all in the same turn. You will see a big dive in the FPS. But it's about where I would expect from a title this far away from release. One thing I want to talk about, and this is highly important to me, is music. The reason why it's so important in a Warhammer 40,000 game is because that dire feeling of religious overall dread that the game has, of following a dead god emperor, of going out there and fighting on the aliens, has to hit just right. And if it's some kind of generic thrash music, that really isn't going to end up benefiting the game. So far, this is some of the best music I've heard in one of these style of games ever. Bar none. Otherworldly, open, huge, mired in a key I wasn't expecting, taking a brass section and then just putting them in the deepest, darkest depression and running what they play through a synth. Everything is awesome. That's not the only track, though. There were a number of tracks that I found that were all different, enthusiastically different. And I'll have these samples at the end, but there's one part when you're sitting down with the ruler of this place that you landed. It makes Mos Eisley's look like a daycare center. The music changes to this rhythmic clang and bang, strings interspersed with metal smashing together, but on a rhythm like a soundtrack you would expect. In fact, reminiscing back to some of the soundtracks I liked, it reminded me a little bit of Sherlock Holmes the movies in many ways, and draws you into every single scene. The real kicker here is the music loves to filter in just slightly the sounds of organs, like funerals and churches, getting ready for funerals, or right after a funeral, or whatever you would hear at your own funeral. You get the point. Very cool stuff, and there is a lot of stuff going on musically that I think people who like this kind of thing will be highly impressed. Sound effects for guns and for spells and for all the different psyker abilities also seemed very good. One thing missing was voice. There was none that I can even remember, at least at this time. I don't know if it's going to go fully voiced, but this is early enough that I could see them not having any in this demo. But did any of that affect my fun? This is one of the most enjoyable demos I've played in a long time. Well, it's not a demo, it's a vertical slice, and there's a ton of it. And I revisited it multiple times just looking around and investigating. It's also one of the few game worlds that really looks like a game world. How many times have we gone to Skyrim and the same three dudes are passing around the same $5 and they're supposedly running the entire economy for a town? This game has enough characters that you can absolutely buy off on it. Now, I will admit it can be a bit cumbersome when you see that many and a little difficult to parse, but I will trade difficulty to parse for a fiction that feels actually functional when it comes to all of the stuff that's going on within a world. So that's it from me. I hope you got this far. Remember, the audio blurbs will be at the end so you can listen to some of the samples. Check out the Patreon. It really helps. Check out YouTube. Hit the notify all button. That is absolutely essential now with the world of demonetization, but even more so with the way YouTube doesn't even inform people if you have multiple uploads. And I do happen to do uploads for the Mythbusters on Shorts, as well as all the news, as well as the podcast and the reviews. Quite quickly, that can end up not getting alerted to people. So please do if you get a chance. That's it for me. Can't wait for the game.
Guided by faith. I refuse.
Never wavered in the face of adversity. Nothing I can't do.